fired up crowd. They're ready for hour number two. And we begin hour number two with an important topic, foreign policy. Congressman Paul, many Middle East experts now say Iran may be less than 1 year away from getting a nuclear weapon. Now, judging from your past statements, even if you had solid intelligence that Iran, in fact, was going to get a nuclear weapon, President Paul would remove the U.S. sanctions on Iran, included those added by the Obama administration. So, to be clear, GOP nominee Paul would be running left of President Obama on the issue of Iran.
But I'd be running with the American people because it would be a much better policy. But for you to say that there's some scientific evidence and some people arguing that maybe in a year they might have a weapon, there's a lot more saying they don't have it. There's no UN evidence of that happening. Klepper at the in our National Security Department, he says there is no evidence. It's no different than it was in 2003. You know what I really fear about what's happening here? It's another Iraq coming. There's war propaganda going on, and we're arguing. To me, the greatest danger is that we will have a president that will overreact, that we will soon bomb Iran. And the sentiment is very mixed. It's very mixed even in Israel. The head of the security for Israel, who just recently retired, said that it wouldn't make any sense to do this, to take them out because they might be having a weapon. So I would say that the greatest danger is overreacting. There is no evidence that they have it. And it would make more sense if we lived through the Cold War, which we did, with 30,000 missiles pointed at us. We ought to really sit back and think and not jump the gun and believe that we are going to be attacked. That's how we got into that useless war in Iraq and lost so much in Iraq.
Congressman Paul, the question was based on the premise that you had solid intelligence. You actually had solid intelligence as President Paul. And yet you still, at that point, would pull back U.S. sanctions, and again, as a GOP nominee, would be running left of President Obama on this issue.
Yes. All we're doing is promoting their desire to have it. Ehud Barak, the defense minister for Israel, said that if he were in Iran, he would probably want a nuclear weapon too, because they're surrounded for geopolitical reasons. So that's an understanding. So the fact that they are surrounded, they have a desire. And how do we treat people when they have a nuclear weapon? With a lot more respect. What did we do with Libya? We talked to them, we talked them out of their nuclear weapon, and then we killed them. So it makes more sense to work with people. And the whole thing is that nuclear weapons are loaded over there. Pakistan and India, Israel has 300 of them. We have our ships there. We got to get it in a proper context. Right. We don't need another war.
Understood. And you make that point quite a lot. I'll try one more time. Iran is reportedly running exercises on closing the Straits of Hormuz, a key passage, as you know, for global trade. Now, what should the U.S. response be if Iran were to take that dramatic step?
Well, the plans are on the book. All they talk about is when are we, the West, going to bomb Iran? So why wouldn't they talk about, they don't have a weapon, they don't have a nuclear weapon, why wouldn't they try to send out some information there and say, if you come and bomb us, we might close the Straits of Hormuz down. So already the president, I think, is wisely backing off on the sanctions because it's going to be an economic calamity if you take all the oil out of Europe. So I think that makes sense. He knows these sanctions are overreaching. Sanctions are an act of war when you prevent goods and services from going into a country. We need to approach this a little differently. We have 12,000 diplomats in our services. We ought to use a little bit of diplomacy once in a while.
Okay. Just a reminder again, that little friendly beep is when you wrap up. Senator Santorum, you have a very different thought about the threat from Iran. For several years, according to U.S. military leaders, Iran has provided training, funding, and lethal arms to jihadists killing American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. Are those acts of war?
They have been continually. They just tried to plan an attack here in this country, killing the Saudi ambassador. They've been at war with us since 1979. The IEDs that have killed so many soldiers, they're manufactured in Iran. Iran is not any other country. It's a country that is ruled by the equivalent of Al-Qaeda on top of this country. They are a radical theocracy. The principal virtue of the Islamic Republic of Iran, according to President Ahmadinejad, is not freedom, opportunity, it's martyrdom. The idea, Ron, that mutual assured destruction, like the policy during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, would work on Iran when their principal virtue is martyrdom, is mutual assured destruction with respect to Iran would not be any kind of idea of preventing a war. It would be an inducement to war. This is what their objective is. Their objective is to, in fact, create a calamity. This is what their theology teaches. They believe that it is their mission to take on the West. They don't hate us because of what we do or the policies we have. They hate us because of who we are and what we believe in. And we need to make sure that they do not have a nuclear weapon. And we should be working with the State of Israel right now. We should use covert activity, and we should be planning a strike against their facilities and say, if you do not open up those facilities and not close them down, we will close them down for you.
Governor Romney, this week, President Obama said the U.S. asked Iran to give our downed high-tech drone back. As you know, the Iranians have it on display. They claim they are extracting data from it, and they have no intention of giving it back. Yesterday, you called the president's response, quote, extraordinarily weak and timid. Now, in your book, you write, quote, weakness invites challenges, acts of intimidation, acts of aggression, and sometimes war. So in this case, are President Obama's actions inviting war?
Absolutely. Does timidity and weakness invite aggression on the part of other people? Absolutely. A strong America is the best ally peace has ever known. This is a president with the spy drone being brought down. He says, pretty please? A foreign policy based on pretty please? You got to be kidding. This is a president who fundamentally believes that this next century is the post-American century. Perhaps it's going to be the Chinese century. He's wrong. It has to be the American century. America has to lead the free world. And the free world has to lead the entire world. The right course under President Obama's plans is to shrink our military, thinking somehow if we appease or accommodate the tyrants of the world, that the world will be safer. He's wrong. The right course for America is to strengthen our economy, our values, our families, and our military. We need to rebuild our Navy and go from 9 ships a year to 15. We need to modernize our Air Force. We need 100,000 new additional troops in our military. We need to take care of our veterans in the way they deserve. It is time for us to recognize once again, a strong military does not create war. A strong America prevents people from trying to test us around the world.
Congresswoman Bachmann, today is the official end of the U.S. military operations in Iraq, and there is real concern, as you know, about growing Iranian influence inside Iraq. Also, the Deputy Prime Minister there has expressed concerns about the country possibly slipping into civil war. Are there any circumstances as president where you would send U.S. troops back into Iraq?
Well, I think clearly the biggest mistake that President Obama has made, and there are many when it comes to foreign policy, has been the decision that he made regarding Iraq. He was essentially given on a silver platter victory in Iraq, and he's choosing intentionally to lose the peace. And we all know what's going to happen. We know that Iran is going to be the hegemon and try to come into Iraq and have the dominant influence, and then Iraq will essentially have dominance from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean through its ally Syria. And with all due respect to Ron Paul, I think I have never heard a more dangerous answer for American security than the one that we just heard from Ron Paul. And I'll tell you the reason why. And the reason why I would say that is because we know without a shadow of a doubt that Iran will take a nuclear weapon, They will use it to wipe our ally Israel off the face of the map, and they've stated they will use it against the United States of America. Look no further than the Iranian Constitution, which states unequivocally that their mission is to extend jihad across the world and eventually to set up a worldwide caliphate. We would be fools and knaves to ignore their purpose and their plan.
Congressman Paul.
Obviously, I would like to see a lot less nuclear weapons. I don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. I would like to reduce them because there would be less chance of war. But to declare war on 1.2 billion Muslims and say all Muslims are the same, this is dangerous talk. Yeah, there are some radicals, but they don't come here to kill us because we're free and prosperous. Do they go to Switzerland and Sweden? I mean, that's absurd. If you think that is the reason, we have no chance of winning this. They come here and they explicitly explain it to it. The CIA has explained it to us. It said they come here and they want to do us harm because we're bombing them. What is the whole world about the drone being in Iran? And we're begging and pleading, and how are we going to start a war to get this drone back? Why were we flying the drone over Iran? Why do we have to bomb so many countries? Why are we have 900 bases, 130 countries, and we're totally bankrupt? How are you going to rebuild the military when we have no money? How are we going to take care of the people? So I think this wild goal to have another war in the name of defense is the dangerous thing. The danger is really us overreacting, and we need a strong national defense, and we need to only go to war with a declaration of war and just carelessly flouting it and starting these wars so often.
Speaker Gingrich, is Congressman Paul.
Can I respond to that? Can I respond? And the problem would be the greatest underreaction in world history if we have an avowed madman who uses that nuclear weapon to wipe nations off the face of the earth. And we have an IAEA report that just recently came out that said literally Iran is within just months of being able to obtain that weapon. Okay. Nothing could be more dangerous than the comments that we just heard.
All right, 30 seconds.
There is no UN report that said that. It's totally wrong on what you just said.
IAEA report.
That is not true. They produced information that led you to believe that, but they have no evidence. There's been no enrichment of these bombs.
If we agree with that, the United States people could be at risk of our national security.
So I'd like to finish. If she thinks we live in a dangerous world, she ought to think back when I was drafted in 1962 with the nuclear missiles in Cuba. And Kennedy calls Khrushchev and talks to him and talks him out of this, and we don't have a nuclear exchange. And you're trying to dramatize this, that we have to go and treat Iran like we've treated Iraq and kill 1 million Iraqis, and 8,000 some Americans have died since we've gone to war. You cannot solve these problems with war. You can solve the problems if we follow our Constitution, go to war, only when we declare the war, go in and win them and get them over with, instead of this endless fighting and this endless attitude that we have enemy all around the world.
But as President, I stand on the side of peace.
Thank you.
For the American people.
We've been pretty liberal with our friendly ding. Mr. Speaker, you have been openly critical of the United Nations. For example, on the topic of Palestinian efforts for statehood at the UN, you said, quote, "We don't need to fund a corrupt institution to beat up on our allies." In a Gingrich administration, would the United States leave the UN?
No, but we would dramatically reduce our reliance on it, and we'd confront certain realities. People talk about a peace process. 11 missiles were fired into Israel last month. Last month. Over 200 missiles have been fired into Israel this year. Do you think if we had 11 missiles fired into the United States, well, with this president, he might well say, gee, maybe we could communicate and you would like us more. But I don't think I think most of us, most Americans would say, if you're firing missiles at me, that may not be a very good gesture, okay? The United Nations camps that we have helped fund have been training grounds for terrorism. As Congresswoman Bachmann pointed out the last time we debated, she was over there with textbooks that are clearly teaching terrorism that are indirectly funded by the United States through the UN. We have no obligation to lie and every obligation to tell the truth about how bad the UN bureaucracy is and why it ought to be fixed, or we ought to radically cut what we're paying.